And we welcome you into another installment of the JC and Morgan podcast. He is JC Sherbert of 24/7 Sports, coming to you from the Windy City, as it were. Mike Morgan of ESPN, SEC Network, here in the Mecca of college football, Atlanta. We have a lot to get to talk about here today. Of course, more drama continues in the Big Ten, the Pac-12. That never-ending soap opera continues, and who knows? We might have breaking news while we're doing this, much like when we had Andy Staples on last week. The Jamie Newman news broke literally as we're doing the tail end of that interview. 76 FBS teams are playing football. We got to see some of those over the weekend. It definitely was unique in a lot of respects, with either no crowds or limited crowds, some sloppy play as to be expected. We'll talk some about that, and we've already got a coach fired. One came in Hattiesburg, but we love getting good guests on here, and we've got a good one for you today. Also in the state of Georgia, and for my money, one of the top analysts for ESPN for quite some time. We are talking the pride of Parkview High School, and I had to look that up, Matt Stinchcomb. I didn't know you went to the same high school as one Jeff Francoeur, amongst so many other great athletes. So you've got a good well of athletes to come out of your high school in addition to University of Georgia.
There have been quite a few that have come through the halls of that Lilburn High School. And it wasn't always football guys. There was really, it's more a baseball school, still is. Even when Jeff Francoeur and others were going through there, those guys, I think they won 3 straight state championships in football and 3 straight in baseball as well.
Wow. So
it was kind of the salad days of Pantherville. And they're still doing well. Baseball still is a really competitive program, and so is the football program. So I can't say that we had reached quite those heights when I was there, but it was definitely headed in the right direction. My timing's never been great. I was there
we're all about the same age, and I certainly remember you as a player. Am I right to assume you grew up a Bulldogs fan? But what was that process like that got you to Athens?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, it's interesting because there wasn't a lot of Georgia grads. Mom, aunts all went to West Georgia. Dad didn't go to college. Stepdad was at Georgia for, I want to say, the most glorious quarter academic term that anyone has ever experienced. He got more stories out of that one quarter at Georgia than I did in 4 years. So he made his time worth it. But we grew up Georgia fans mainly. Half the family on my dad's side are Georgia Tech people, so we do our best to decipher their binary code. Otherwise, it's mostly Georgia folks, and there's a smattering of Tennessee Vols somewhere in the family tree that we try to ignore as best we can.
Yeah, that's got to be difficult, especially certain weeks out of the year.
Well, it's easier. It's easier these days, Mike.
I was going to say, there's
no.
In the
90s, it was kind of tough.
Yeah, which side of the family's had more bragging rights here of late? Do you suffer from the same paranoid fans that every time you're on and you're doing a game that involves Georgia on the SEC network or what have you, where you get the, he's a Georgia homer, he's biased? Do you get a lot of that like so many of the other former players in this league?
Mike, you know how it works. I get that whether I'm doing a Georgia game or not. It's whoever's playing well, I'm clearly pulling for that team. And whoever's just completely stepping in it on that Saturday, I've got it in for those guys. And it's obvious that my commentary directly impacts their quality of play and the future outcome of that game. So if I were to predict a team's going to win and or lose, I think we all know that, barring some unforeseen circumstances, that's precisely what's going to happen. And a lot of fans hold me to that.
Well, we can expect more of the paranoia this year, I'm sure. Speaking of paranoia, I mean, that among many other emotions have been in the air this crazy off season. What has it been like for you getting ready for all of our favorite time of year, and that is college football season? And yet it's been so awkward. We just had a slate of games, not SEC games, but still games. It did feel a little bit different. We know the pageantry, the overall atmosphere of these stadiums is not going to be the same. Everything's a little bit off, but as I've said all along, it's not going to be ideal. I'll still take it over no football at all. So how have you been able to just kind of maintain sanity as well as composure getting ready for this year?
Well, it has been. I've been frustrated on behalf of the players, and I think I still can harken back far enough and getting to see these games and spend some time with these guys on Fridays and in the off season, that I can empathize more, at least from their perspective. I cannot imagine being a coach, a parent of some of these athletes, an administrator trying to navigate these waters. But all those people I just described are adults, broadcasters, and even in our industry, we're all been kind of vexed. There's been a lot of hand wringing, a lot of gnashing of the teeth going, what is going to happen? But I cannot fathom what it would be like to be a kid, a 20-year-old kid who are we going to play or are we not going to play? If you're in the Big Ten Conference right now and these guys, from what I can gather, did everything that they were asked to do, and even then had the season, we'll say, postponed, at least at this juncture, but certainly not unfold the way they otherwise would have anticipated, including after a schedule release. And regardless of how those decisions were arrived upon, the mindset of those kids and the impact that it likely had on it, talk about adversity. It's hard not to be really frustrated on their behalf. The rest of us will figure it out. But these kids they only get this one opportunity, regardless of what the NCAA says, as far as, kind of tolling this 1 year of eligibility and allowing it to not impact their 4 years on the field. They're not going to get this year back. Those kids aren't getting any younger. And there's a whole new crop of high school athletes that are coming out next year, whether they like it or not. And what about them? So it's really looking at the kids, the student athletes themselves, and how this entire process can impact them. And also seeing all of this through a lens of a pandemic that I think any thinking person will validate is very real. And at the same time, the consequences and the circumstances that are created around it are especially challenging as well, even outside of the health concerns.
Yeah, when you have conference commissioners like Larry Scott continually saying things like, we're doing the best for the health and safety of our players, well, I kind of wonder if that's what the players actually think. I mean, the moment that word came out, clearly there were players that did not feel that way. Were not supporting that decision and still don't support that decision, but they don't seem to have a vote. So I can only imagine, if it was a 21-year-old Matt Stinchcomb entering his junior or senior campaign and somebody at that level is telling you, no, you're not playing because we're looking out for your best interest. But these other leagues, they are going to play, and the NFL is going to play, and high school football in those states, they're going to play, but you can't play. I imagine that might not go over well.
No, to me, that just doesn't hold up to any level of scrutiny, frankly. And I will say that I think all of these various conferences, especially among the Power Five, but even throughout the landscape of college football and even the other fall sports, I don't understand how the decisions that have ultimately been arrived upon are seemingly so disparate when is it just an entirely different fact set that one is looking at versus the other? Is it a lack of preparation or a head start for some conferences versus others that would allow them or afford them the chance to go forward? Is there some provincial study that some conference has, or statistics or data that they have access to that the other conferences didn't? And so is it a less informed decision? I can't imagine that being the case. Why? How could that possibly be the case? At least from the science behind it. And so because of it, if I'm a kid, I'm sitting there going, what gives? How is it that these guys can play and we can't? Is the impact of this virus different based on conference affiliation? There's elements of it that would be exceedingly frustrating, if not infuriating from an athlete's perspective, and insulting, to put a finer point on it, because you're saying, am I not bright enough? Do I not understand enough the information that you're making a decision, Mr. Whomever, president, athletic director, conference commissioner, versus what my parents or whomever my guardians are, or myself, or whoever it is that I seek input from, to arrive upon whether or not I think it makes sense for me to play ball or not this year. Instead, you're just going to take that decision out of my hands and do it for me.
Talking with Matt Stinchcomb here on JC and Morgan. Matt Stinchcomb of the SEC Network, getting ready for a game soon, somewhere, somehow. Details to follow. But that, again, 2020, that's the life we're all living in the broadcasting circles as well. How much football have you had a chance to see thus far? And as a former player, and if you want to bring it to specifically the offensive line, what did you see that maybe was lacking that you would not ordinarily see if we had regular conditions, regular practices, lack of interruptions, et cetera, et cetera? What should we expect will be the biggest kind of chink in the armor for the actual play on the field?
I think it'll be special teams. And I do think that it'll be offensive play early on, although, everybody's kind of sloppy now. We saw in the open, UCA, I think, was the second play of the game, offensive snap, takes one to the house. Mm-hmm. The other night, it was pretty lopsided, obviously, with BYU. I think they were gashing Navy pretty good on effectively the same run concept over and over again. Which is kind of something that the middies typically do, right, with their option attack. But I think early on it makes sense that the offenses will be behind and further behind than they typically would be. There's just not enough reps. There were no spring reps. There wasn't enough time. By the time you're actually practicing, you're also in class. The way the camps had to shift later in the calendar year. But special teams, because I'm curious what impact depth will have on even rosters that have talent top to bottom. And we're talking about programs that have recruited at a pretty elite level, not only with opt-outs, but guys that might not be available on Saturdays because of positive tests, et cetera. What does it look like on the non-normal down snaps, the special team snaps, the coverage units, the return units? I'm just curious as the season unfolds, the way we all hope that it will, that if we start it, that it will be able to finish it. What does it look like from a depth standpoint towards the back end of the season? Because we'll see, a group of 5 teams, even some of the top tier FCS teams, their frontline talent will look a lot like a lot of FBS teams. The problem is that you get to the special teams, and now all of a sudden you've got second, third on the depth chart guys out there running around, and the difference, the drop down is glaring. At those levels versus, say, at an Alabama or a Florida or a Georgia, where they've got talent to spare, and those guys just want to get on the field and put something on tape to where they can get on the regular down snaps. So I think those two areas make the most sense, although, the defense has looked pretty shabby in some ball games already.
Matt, there's 4 new coaches in the SEC this year. Eli Drinkwitz at Missouri, Sam Pittman at Arkansas, Mike Leach at Mississippi State, and Lane Kiffin at Ole Miss. What are you thinking if you're those guys? Because you had such a big break, not necessarily in terms of install and all that, because they did have the walkthrough period, but just in terms of getting to know your players. How important is that when you take over a new situation and knowing who you can trust? Who's a guy that you're familiar enough with to where you can put him in the game in certain situations?
Yeah, that's going to be tough. And there's really no way to develop that rapport over Zoom. I mean, regardless of how normal we act like Zoom is, it's not normal. You can't get to know somebody through an LED screen. Eventually, you got to sit across from them. At least you got to, throw some shade on the other guy. They got to understand what it's like to be around each other. And the fact that those coaches didn't get to do that, it definitely sets them back from an understanding of what kind of kid is this. I can turn on tape and I can tell you if they're good or not, or if they could even potentially execute or not. But what kind of kid is this? And is he the kind of guy that I can trust under a pressure situation? How attentive is he? How does he interact with his teammates? How does he interact with me? How does he take coaching? All those things that they just can't evaluate, and you can't figure that out on a Zoom call. That's really tough. But I will say externally, and those are kind of internal issues, how you interact with your own players, they kind of can breathe a sigh of relief, right, guys? I mean, this is an asterisk year. It's almost just like, hey, let's just get these games out there. Let's try to play them. Let's make it as pretty as we can. There's going to be some horrible football played, guys. I mean, this is not going to be good football. It isn't. But as we pointed out, football is better than no football. Even ugly football. We'll take it. And all these kids will too. And I think the fact that outside of those four guys, and you look at these other programs, there's enough turnover at coordinator, there's enough turnover at quarterback, where all of them are still in a kind of get-to-know-you phase. So it's not as if each one of these squads are going to roll into 2020 hitting on all cylinders. You look at some spots, Texas A&M, they should be dialed in. All the pieces are still there. The head coach, coordinators, and quarterback, all the same guys. Florida, same thing, even though they had a transition during the season last year. Tennessee, Kentucky, they get Terry Wilson back. I mean, there's some that are going to be ahead, but everybody else is kind of in the same boat. And if it doesn't go well this year, is anybody really going to hold anyone's feet to the fire, given what's going on? We should all just be thrilled that they're going to go out there, kick the ball off, and play full quarters of football. But it's not going to be good-looking ball.
Do you think because of a lot of the reasons you just mentioned, Matt, that if there's one, I don't want to call it a positive, but I know for a lot of fans, and we've talked about it on this podcast for years, we're kind of in the era of the cabal, where it's the same 5-6 schools competing for the playoff and the national championship every year. It's become insanely predictable. With the scheduling quirks and the obvious COVID quirks, I mean, if this was a regular year, we know what everybody would be predicting. Alabama in the West and either Georgia or Florida in the East. But maybe because this is a quirky asterisk type of year, maybe it's not as predictable. Do you see potential for some surprises?
Yes, absolutely. And that's what makes it so much more compelling, frankly, is that from a surprise outcome possibility perspective, you're exactly right. All the other years are kind of boring. I felt like, LSU in the kind of year that they ended up putting together, not many people were predicting that. They weren't going to say this is going to be dominant. We're talking about one of the most outlier years that a college football team's ever put together, certainly offensively. But otherwise, it's kind of the same group of the usual suspects. Let's just rotate them through. But this year, when you take into account we'll call it additional adversity that's non-traditional, I think there's quite a leveling of the playing field in that regard. And there's advantages in areas that otherwise wouldn't be as advantageous as they will be this year, I think, where there are no warm-up games. There wasn't a usual ramp-up to the season. There wasn't an opportunity for off-season. If you look at Georgia, there's even incentive and allowance for what was going or thought to be your starting quarterback and transfer from Wake Forest and Jamie Newman is just going to tap out due to COVID concerns and preparation for the NFL. That alone shakes up Georgia's opportunity, and many are saying now that they think that Florida's probably the favorite in that division, and for justifiable reasons. But what about a Kentucky? What does that look like with the pieces that they have back and the fact that everything is intact coming into the season? Are they further along than some of these other programs? Certainly Georgia offensively, I think it's inarguable that Kentucky should be more intact offensively than what was thought to be, at least at one point in time, the potential future division winner in the Georgia Bulldogs. Does that open the door for those guys? I think you look at Texas A&M. They got to be sick about not getting to play their usual 2020 schedule the way it was laid out. But regardless, they do have some distinct advantages given how they return an offense that's almost entirely intact and centered around a quarterback that should be coming to his own in Kellen Mond this year. I don't hear as many people as I thought talking about A&M, and I still hear a lot that are still pushing LSU. I think that they're set further behind because of the massive exodus that they experienced, not only traditionally due to graduation, eligibility exhaustion, or leaving for the NFL, to even some of the opt-outs that they've experienced. So I think it's one of those years, guys. And the fact that you can tap out at any point in time and still have your eligibility preserved is something to watch throughout the season. If a otherwise contender stumbles out of the gates, how intact does that roster remain through the balance of the season? I don't know.
And they're not going to pull your scholarship either.
Right.
Everything's still going to be paid for. That's huge.
It's huge. You get a year of eligibility back. You get your everything else remains intact, and season's not going the way you want it, or it's just we're not going to be contending. And so, you know what? Why risk it? That's not a mentality that I necessarily ascribe to or aspire towards, but it's out there. I think it's very real, and it's something that I think we will ultimately see teams have to experience as this year unfolds.
Matt, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to follow up on that real quick. The Jamie Newman, who you mentioned, story, that actually broke when JC and I were interviewing Andy Staples a week ago. And I don't know about you. I didn't hear anybody in our profession that thought that was coming down the pike. I mean, that was completely out of left field. I'm not sure if the Georgia coaching staff was surprised at all or what, but what was your initial reaction when you heard the news on Newman, and how dramatically do you think it affects Georgia?
Well, selfishly, I was hacked because I thought I was actually on my way to Athens when it broke. I was about 15 minutes away from their facility because we were going to tape the SEC Now show from there. And he was the debut player that I was most looking forward to. So we had to rebuild the B block because Jamie Newman wanted to tap out. I was very surprised. And I get his concerns. There's definitely some validity to it. The timing was very curious. They'd been practicing for some time. They just held their first scrimmage. As we understand it now, he made the coaches aware of his decision on Tuesday before he went public with his decision on Wednesday. And I think that it was just interesting because I don't know what otherwise informed his decision, what changed as far as the situation on the ground to where his concern would elevate from a COVID perspective. And maybe it was just, Dominic Blaylock, the number one returning receiver from a production standpoint anyway, going down with an ACL. He goes out there in the scrimmage, didn't like what he saw, and was like, you know what? Maybe I'm not going to be able to embellish upon my draft stock with this crew. Maybe that's what it was, and it could have been as simple as that. Regardless, it definitely changes things. And that's a massive understatement, given the way he performed a year ago, albeit rather inauspiciously versus better opponents. His statistics, at least from a production standpoint, was less than stellar. That said, there's no arguing the skill set, the experience, and the ability to plug into that program more readily than a JT Daniels that's further behind, that was introduced to the program much later, regardless of the fact that they didn't have a spring practice and they were doing largely Zoom meetings. It definitely impacts, I think, the way Georgia projects to perform offensively, at least in the nearest term, knowing that they have to pivot that hard. And from a depth standpoint, obviously, it changes things as well because you're looking at now a Dwan Mathis or JT Daniels-led quarterback room versus maybe the three-headed monster you had with Newman in there.
Matt, you played college football with Mike Bobo at Georgia. I'm sure you're very familiar with him from his time at Georgia. We have a lot of South Carolina listeners to this podcast. What kind of impact do you think he makes on Will Muschamp's program this year? I know that he brought his quarterback with him from Colorado State, and they're battling it out with Walensky. But, just kind of your take on the Gamecocks on that side of the ball, knowing Mike Bobo kind of like you do. From a scheme perspective or a fit perspective, how do you think that fits in?
Well, I'll say this. I'll predisclose my bias, and it's obvious. I played with Mike. He was a great quarterback at Georgia, and people, some will argue with that. They don't know what they're talking about. And from a play caller standpoint, his reputation kind of stands on its own. It's one of the best offensive coordinators and play callers that we've seen in the conference, and the output is there. The production is there. I think that I know for a fact that that offense will have never been coached harder. He is an incredibly demanding guy, but not unreasonable. A guy that coaches to success, doesn't coach to failure, meaning he's going to put his guys in a position to experience success and then expect more of themselves versus putting them in situations where, yeah, it's going to be challenging, maybe you sink, maybe you swim. You can find a million coaches out there that can do that. Let's just throw out a super challenging scenario out here and see which one of these guys are able to, float back to the surface. Mike's not that guy, but he's going to demand an immense amount of effort and level of execution out of these guys. I think what's most interesting about Mike in his coaching career is his versatility. The fact that he's been able to incorporate a number of different offensive philosophies without really ever getting fully away from where he is from a mentality standpoint. In some ways, he reminds me of Jimbo Fisher in that he has got a hardened steel edge to the way he wants his offenses to approach the way they play the game. They're going to be hard-nosed. They'll be downhill. They're going to be tough. That doesn't mean that they're a grind and plot them out. Let's line up in the power eye and challenge defenses and just slam our head against a brick wall. We've seen him change to where he can use multiple different tempos. Nobody's going to formation more often, or is at least capable of formationing more often with more personnel groupings, getting to the same play 6 or 7 different times or different ways to where the defense can't necessarily draw a bead on what they're about to see. And it could be the same thing. It's 34 gut over and over and over again, but how did we get there? That's enough to even formation a defense into an advantage for the offense. But the fans, I think more than anything, he does a great job of sequencing his play calling, where a play in the first quarter makes sense for a play in the third quarter. And, defensive coordinators know that, players know that, fans don't always notice that. Players certainly notice that. When you're running plays, it's not just to gain yards right here. That play's meant to succeed in and of itself, but it's also meant to lead to success later on in the game. And it's more than just, run, play action, fake. He does a great job of that. That's something that I think will be a hallmark of the offense this year if they can get to it and if they can get that running game established despite some of the injuries they've already experienced.
Final moments with Matt Stinchcomb of ESPN on the SEC Network. Matt, we've obviously eliminated one guy from this list in Jamie Newman. I'm going to go off the grid and not ask you who's going to be in Atlanta because you're going to be asked that 1,000 times if you haven't already. Give me the quarterback at the end of the year that we're going to say that was the best year that anybody had in the SEC at that position.
I think it should be the Kellen Mond kid. I really do. He's got the run element to his game. He can extend plays. He's gotten better. He's still not as good as he needs to be as far as being quicker with his decision-making. That was his issue. That's kind of been his issue. But he loves to be coached hard. He's got all the pieces around him. I think this should be his year. I think there's a very real chance for this to be his year. And you look at the quarterback landscape, obviously Kyle Trask, somewhat proven in an abbreviated season for him last year. Obviously didn't start the season as a starter. You got Garantano at Tennessee, who, gosh, from a mental toughness standpoint, proved that kid's made of some special stuff, the way they were able to finish the year versus the way it started, even for him personally as well as for the team. But I still think it should be Kellen Mond's year. I think it sets up that way for him. It should be a year where finally I think the Aggies fans see what they got in Jimbo Fisher, but also some of the promise that they saw early in Kellen Mond that has been kind of slowly simmering to a boil this year.
And there's a lot of Aggie fans that believe this ought to be Jimbo Fisher's year in terms of marked improvement. And obviously those two are tied together. I don't think there's any question about that. Matt, again, always have enjoyed your work. Hope we can link up sometime. Congratulations again, by the way, on College Football Hall of Fame right here in Atlanta. I know you and I haven't seen each other since then, but that had to be a tremendous honor, tremendous experience for you.
Man, it was a blast. I couldn't believe they let me in that sucker. I snuck in with
Well, it was well deserved for sure, and you can catch Matt again. Going to be working with somebody somewhere in the SEC somehow, but a lot of these questions are still being resolved in a very bizarre year for all the TV networks, including ours. Matt, thank you so much for the time, and enjoy the rest of what's left of your time off. Okay.
I appreciate it. Mike, JC, thanks for having me.
Thanks, Matt.
Take care. Great stuff from Matt Stinchcomb of ESPN on the SEC Network. We'll take a very quick timeout. Back with a whole lot more on JC and Morgan.
No road, no problem. Get to where you're going with a truck loan from Founders Federal Credit Union. Prepare for the drive of your life with our low rates and easy application process. Set your budget with our online auto loan calculator or get started right away on your application in Founders online at foundersfcu.com/auto. On the move already and looking for a lower payment? Refinance with Founders and lock in your low rate today. Visit relaxjoinfounders.com to see if you qualify for membership. Founders Federal Credit Union is federally insured by NCUA.
All right, back here on JC and Morgan, and again, lots to get to, JC, as we've been looking at what's going on. We're recording this on Wednesday afternoon, and I had hoped there are some people out there with Twitter accounts that were making some pretty brash predictions. I think there's one guy, Yacht Boy or something.
Sir Yacht. Oh, man.
Who is this guy? I had no idea who it was, but it was getting traction.
This is a kid with a TikTok account. He's like, if you read through his stuff, anybody that's promoting something else besides the information they have, there's an ulterior motive there. And it was just like, he's been breaking news about the Big Ten returning to play for a long time, and not a lot of it's come true. I think me or you could have done it with it's a Twitter account connected to it's like, hey, come watch my TikTok videos. They have nothing to do with Big Ten football or anything. So I think he's laughing all the way to relevance there.
I guess so. I mean, even Dan Patrick is somebody I have a lot of respect for, and he's been right on a lot.
He's had to go back, yeah.
But he's had to go back on some stuff. You can't say October 10th is what I'm hearing. Well, I did say the word if the protocol. I mean, come on. Wow. October 10th, it doesn't look like it's happening at all.
And what he said today, though, is something I've been hearing too. The Illinois schools politically do not want to play the Michigan schools, even though we thought, because the governor of Michigan reinstituted high school football,
right.
Michigan's got a governor that doesn't want them to play, and then their school president is an epidemiologist. And he's been against them playing for a long time. So that wipes Michigan State out, Illinois, Northwestern. And then I think for different reasons, Maryland and Rutgers did not want to play. So that wipes out a bunch. Still, Mike, if you're missing those schools, if you get Wisconsin, Iowa, Nebraska, Purdue, Indiana, Penn State, Ohio State together, even if you're having a season without Michigan, I mean, to be honest, if every other school is going to play and Michigan doesn't want to, then I think that you need to probably change school presidents if you care about football, because I know people in Michigan care about football, and that's the only thing that's stopping them from playing. And I don't think at this point, Mike, they're not giving out any cookies and nobility awards for sitting out the season. By day, if you're not trying to actively play, you're looking worse and worse and worse.
Well, and specifically, the guy you're talking about is Michigan President Mark Schlissel.
Yeah.
Who has not been I guess he's following the lead of Kevin Warren. I see Larry Scott everywhere, and granted, Larry Scott might be trying to save his job. But Kevin Warren, who I guess assumed that everybody was just going to follow his lead, the guy who's the new kid on the block and has virtually zero experience in college athletics, he jumped the gun on everybody after going on joint conference calls with the other conference commissioners about scheduling. He kind of went rogue and said, we're going to do conference only. That didn't go over well with the other four. And then on this, 6 days after putting out that schedule, decides he's kind of going to go rogue again and tell everybody we're not playing, and then lead people to believe there could be a spring model, which we know is not happening. And I'm sorry, if you start football January 1, that's not spring football. That's winter football. Mm-hmm. But you've got that, and you've got Schlissel is not commenting on much of anything. sometimes I wonder, like, if these school presidents understand there is some accountability. Like, I get it. He's got a medical background. If there's anything we've learned, you can't get all these doctors to agree on anything. It's not unlike if you had a torn shoulder or knee and you go and you get a second opinion from a doctor and he gives you a different opinion from the other doctor. I think many of us have been through that process. The COVID analysis and it's so new and it's so unknown in a lot of respects that you should not expect a consensus. And I don't look to Mark Schlissel as the end-all, be-all of what it is. So when people say, well, we're going with the science. No, you're going with your opinion of the science.
Exactly. Big difference. We've crossed. So how is the science different? They're trying to spin it. And this is where it gets dicey and I think bias and arrogant on a lot of people's part. You know, they're trying to spin it like, well, the science that the ACC and SEC and Big 12 are listening to and the American and the Sun Belt and Conference USA, that's not the same. So we have better science. No, science is science. And look, nobody's still been able to explain to me why with proper testing protocols and proper, quarantine things and PPE and all the things that they do to protect football players. Why is that dangerous, more dangerous than throwing them out into the student body? University of Michigan President Schlissel has already come out and drawn heat from his own faculty because he hasn't been transparent about them opening up regular school. Mm-hmm. So you're not going to have regular school, but I mean, you're going to open back up regular school controversial and then shut football down. To me, it sounds like, somebody that's maybe either wanting, a power trip on campus. I'm bigger than football or whatever. Or C, it's political. I don't know that there's any other explanation for it, at the University of Michigan. Now, I think Rutgers and Maryland, maybe, there's probably reasons they want to set out. It's been kind of weird with those two because you've heard they wanted to sit out from the start. And I know that in the state of Illinois, there are some of the most draconian, backward, most ridiculous, COVID restrictions known to in the entire country here in the state of Illinois that don't make any sense at all. And the best I can say about that is here, politics, it's usually about somebody up the food chain or down the food chains getting paid for something. I don't know what that is. But since I've lived in Illinois, I've learned that politics are a little different here. And so something's keeping, the governor, who's a big marshmallow type of a leader, in my opinion, just not even a leader. Something's keeping him going. Illinois, Northwestern don't need to play college football, even though the Bears are playing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's something that's something political there that's happening in this state. But, I still don't understand if those two, if Sir Yacht happens to be correct, which I don't know that he is. If Sir Yacht happens to be correct, and it is those schools that don't want to play, there's still 8 other teams in the Big 12. We used to have 8-team conferences. Go play a 7-game season starting in late October and get into the playoff. I mean, you can justify an Ohio State team that's played 8 games, that's undefeated, that's kicked everybody's ass, getting in the playoff. I'm sorry, right. That's just how it is. Why not go and do that? That's my question.
And quite frankly, they're the only team that most of us think has a chance of making a 14 playoff anyway. With all due respect to Jim Harbaugh, with all due respect to Wisconsin, Ohio State has a team that legitimately can contend for a national championship. I don't think there's another team in the Big Ten right now that can.
No. Yeah.
So if you've got Ohio State in, for the league, it's a great thing. For Ohio State, it's a great thing. Financially, I don't know how they would divvy it up to the schools that didn't participate, but I imagine they would also get some portion of all that money that would come in that's not going to necessarily come in if you just completely punt the season away or settle on what most people would call a de facto JV season if you play after the national championship's already been decided and you're going to play in January, February, March. That's the David Shaw line of reasoning, the head coach of Stanford, who I've always liked. But when he says things like, well, we'll just have a fall champion and a spring champion. No, dude, that's not the way it's going to be looked at. It's not going to be looked at co-national champions. You're going to be playing for your own trophy, and you can call it whatever you want, but it's not going to be a national championship for the 2020 season. And so when you look at all that, I keep wanting to say it's not political, but it becomes harder and harder. It's almost, I wish you could just you could all just, all the Big Ten fans and college football fans that are clamoring for football and would like to see the Big Ten participate, if you could just sign a document that says, if the Big Ten does play, I promise I will not give any credit to one Donald Trump. And maybe then they would sign off on it and to just take the politics out of it. Because honestly, I don't care who gets the credit. I'll give Kevin Warren credit for crying out loud. And so far, Kevin Warren hadn't impressed much of anybody. But if he gets this thing done and they somehow start anywhere near October the 10th, or 12th or whatever it is, I'll be more than happy to say, way to go, Kevin. You're on a hot streak, buddy. I don't care. But I mean, this to give you a better perspective on how political it's become, I'm learning names like Larry Chatfield now. You know who Larry Chatfield is, JC?
No.
I didn't know either. Don't feel bad. He's the Speaker of the House in Michigan.
Oh, yeah. I saw his name on the letter they sent today.
Yeah, they've got a letter out there which basically says the Big Ten can play sports safely. The Big Ten should play sports safely. They should reverse the decision. Hashtag let the Big Ten play. And there's several people like him, politicians, that have signed off on this. But you've got Kevin Warren and you've got some governors and you've got some school presidents that are they are determined not to have this happen. So that's the Big Ten update. Then you got the Pac-12. And like I said, I mean, Larry Scott, one thing I'll say about Larry Scott, and granted now he's trying to save his job. So the last thing you want to do is do the get in the bunker mentality like Kevin Warren has. But Larry Scott has always been pretty accessible, and Larry Scott comes across pretty well in an interview. Must be that Women's Tennis Association background that he has before he took the job at one of the 5 most powerful conferences in all of college athletics. For all the things he's done wrong, i.e. the Pac-12 network, which has been a disaster that they hope to fix in the next TV contract when it's up. He has always been accessible. He's a good talker. And when you hear him, he seems like a good guy. Like I don't know many of these guys on that level, but Larry Scott seems like the kind of guy, if you had a beer with, not a bad guy. However, he made the decision along with the Big Ten. Now, here's the thing, and you and I going all the way back to March and April talked about this. The conference that was going to have the hardest time making this go was the Pac-12. And the reason is, I don't think this is talked about enough. And I listened to an interview. He was on Dan Patrick last week. I caught him on Rich Eisen today. And Rich spent the better part of the interview trying to lead Larry Scott down a road. Rich basically wanted Larry Scott to say the only reason that Donald Trump is calling the Big Ten as opposed to the Pac-12 is because those are swing states and the Pac-12 is not.
Yeah, so, that's common. That's a common theory.
Right. I mean, and Rich is like raising his eyebrow and like, look at me. I really unraveled this. And that almost seemed to be the biggest point of Rich Eisen's interview. Rich is great on the NFL Network covering the NFL. I don't know if he's totally in tune with the finer intricacies of college football. So the interview was kind of lacking some of the things I hoped it would have. But Larry he's said this a couple of times now. He says, look, the new test could be a game changer. We thought January 1 was going to be the start date, maybe now a little bit earlier, not October, but maybe November, et cetera, et cetera. But what he keeps coming back to is California and Oregon do not have state government approval. That is your ultimate trump card.
They don't have it to practice, Mike.
Well,
they can't get together to practice.
That's what I'm saying. So
even though the 49ers and Rams and
right. Well, if you're looking for logic and consistency in this from lawmakers, good luck. But basically, if you can't practice, you can't play games, right? So what Larry Scott knows, and here's a guy fighting for his job. So I promise you, Larry Scott wants football. Because if there's no football in the Pac-12, it's one more reason for the powers that be in that conference to say, okay, it's time for a change. But he knows, and when he keeps saying kind of parenthetically, hey, this is a game changer, and hey, we want what's best for the health and safety of our players, but we also know we can perhaps get this done. But he keeps reminding everybody, California and Oregon won't allow it. That's 6 teams, 6 in the Pac-12. It's half your conference, including 2 of the signature programs in Southern Cal and Oregon.
Yeah.
That would have to just be AWOL during the process. So the Pac-12 is behind a much different 8 ball than the Big Ten is. And I think that in all the confusion and all of this, that's been lost. I will throw Larry Scott one life preserver on that front. He cannot control what California and Oregon are mandating.
And, Kate Brown and Gavin Newsom have been among the governors that have been the most unrealistic and, ridiculous in terms of their draconian measures, just like J.B. Pritzker in Illinois and Wolf and they had to just override Wolf in Pennsylvania to play high school football. He said, I don't think they should play. And they were like, tough. We voted 25-5 to play. But Kate Brown is very draconian in how she runs her state in terms of COVID-19, even though Oregon hadn't gotten hit that hard, even with all the stuff that's going on in Portland and, all that good stuff. And I'm not going to get into that, but there's obviously a lot of public gatherings in Oregon and not a massive outbreak of COVID. And then
not a lot of social distancing when you're rioting.
California's been just ridiculous. I mean, with how they've worked. I mean, if I lived in California now, I don't care what political party I'm a part of. I'm pissed off of the entire government. I'm getting taxed to death. The power doesn't even work half the time. They had to have some, blackouts or something yesterday because their grid isn't working. It's expensive as heck to live out there. And their COVID stuff has been absolutely insane since the start. And to me, Mike, that's not a Democrat or Republican thing. And that's just a ridiculous thing. And I get it. And when the Pac-12 put out their medical reasons why they didn't think they should play, it was very localized and specific. And if you read through it, they did mention, that there was a political type of issue, and they called it a moral issue, and maybe it is, that they didn't feel like they could frontline tests to the players over the general public. And in California, there has been a COVID test shortage. I believe Arizona as well. I don't think so in Oregon, but as I said, she loves to shut it down. So, that was the thing. And so I think I understood where the Pac-12 was coming from this entire time. I did not understand the Big Ten. And for those of you out there in the national media that want to continue to side with the Big Ten and think they made the right decision, how are you going to credibly side with the conference that's been the least transparent through all of this? And I said it last week. I'll say it this week. You were basically throwing in your chips with the conference that's been the least transparent. I've heard doctors from the Big 12. Bob Bowlesby is on everything. Greg Sankey's done a lot of interviews over and over. He's been very transparent. They let their doctors speak. The ACC's doctor from Duke has been on the record. The Big Ten has been – the only thing we have actually heard on the record was some guy from Penn State, I think it was a professor, saying 35% of their guys had myocarditis. He had to walk it back. Oh. So if you're throwing in with the Big 12, just in terms of, you want to talk about facts, you want to talk about the science, then how are you going to sit there and just throw in, you're basically throwing in with Harry Potter over like, Mr. Wizard.
And by the way, there are some people, as we've alluded to, that cover the sport. They couldn't wait to retweet that completely erroneous Penn State report. I mean, they couldn't wait. They were salivating, and then they had to walk it back. Oh, by the way, that was completely inaccurate.
Terrible. I mean, it wasn't even it was just some guy talking out of his butt at some sort of thing. But yeah, I had to Google Mr. Wizard because I thought that was a science show. Mr. Wizard's World. We all remember.
Yeah, I remember that when I was a kid.
Yeah, and and so I was trying to use a wizard, like another wizard, but that was a scientist. They're both wizards, but are you going to believe Harry Potter or are you going to believe Mr. Wizard? I'm going to believe Mr. Wizard because he's real. And he's telling me scientific facts, and he's not like casting spells and riding around playing kiddish or whatever the hell that is. So that's what I'm saying. You're basically, if you side with the Big Ten, you're siding with Harry Potter over Mr. Wizard.
I like that. That's the first reference of either one of those fine gentlemen that we've ever had here on JC.
Absolutely.
So that's where we are there. You got the Bobby Carpenters of the world, former Ohio State player and ESPN analyst who's all over this and keeps tweeting like, come on, guys, get it done. Do the right thing, putting pressure on people. But again, there's a big difference between the Big Ten and the Pac-12 in that regard. It doesn't matter how powerful you are, including the President of the United States. I think a lot of people have learned it's kind of been a civics course lately. There's only so many things a president can do. The states ultimately run the states in a lot of fronts. And right now, the California and the Oregon schools, they just can't do it. They just can't do it. That's not the case in the Big Ten. This thing could be the Big Ten could overturn this thing today and start playing games in mid-October and have a full season without a bye week.
And so much of that in the Pac-12 too is county by county. They've given these county health directors like all these enormous powers. Speaking of Harry Potter-esque type of stuff, like Larry Scott in an interview with 24/7 Sports was saying that the county officials, that gave the Chargers and Rams and 49ers exemptions. L.A. County, I think would be one. I think you'd have the counties around San Francisco. For Cal and Stanford, that may the testing protocol may happen, but I'm with you. The Pac-12, I'm giving them a total pass, and I gave them a pass to begin with because I didn't know that they had the money to spend on all this testing. But like Larry Scott said, it's a game changer because this testing is cheaper. And it doesn't cost them as much, and you can do it on a daily basis. Stuart Mandel, of all people, actually wrote a column saying, they could delay the college football playoff by a week.
I saw that.
And then
a week or 2 weeks.
Maybe it was 2 weeks.
I think it's 2 weeks.
And then, 2 weeks. Play the semis the 15th through the 17th, and then play the championship game, kind of around the NFL on January 23rd. I wouldn't have a problem with that as long as the Pac-12 and Big Ten decided to, hey, we're going to start playing here, because you're also going to have some situations where if you're the SEC or ACC, you may need a couple of weekends to kind of, reschedule some games or stuff. You have some bowls or whatever. But I don't think I would have a problem with that. I do think ACC, SEC, Big 12, Mike, probably would scoff at that. Why are we moving this back for these guys?
Well, again, this is where if you're Kevin Warren and you think you're the smartest guy in the room and you're going to show up the other four conference commissioners when you go rogue on the scheduling announcement and try to, again, look like, hey, we care more about the student athletes than everybody else does. So I'm jumping out first here, despite the fact that we've been coordinating conference calls for 5 months. I'm going to go ahead and tell you this is what we're doing. And all the other four conference commissioners are like, what?
Whoa, yeah.
I thought we were on the same page here. When you do that, you all of a sudden, the goodwill that you might have accumulated over time by working and not trying to, again, go rogue, all of a sudden, that's out the window. Now these other conferences are not going to do you any favors. So I read the same article you did. And yeah, as a fan, look, you and I both have extensive backgrounds in the Southeastern Conference. I have never been one that wants the demolition of every other college football conference. I don't look at it like this is a game of Survivor and everybody else you want to kick off the island and you're the last one standing there. I think college football, I've said this numerous times on this podcast, college football is at its best when there are powerful teams from all over the country and not just one region, and not just one league. And we have lost a lot of that over the last few years. Mm-hmm. Again, the playoff era, it's been the SEC/Clemson show with a little bit of Oklahoma going in and losing every time in the playoff mixed in. We haven't had a whole lot in an Ohio State. We haven't had a whole lot else, and we haven't had anybody from the West. So I don't pull for the demise of any of these leagues. So yes, in theory, I would like to see that, but I just don't expect the SEC, ACC, and Big 12 to go, hey, sure. After showing us up,
yeah, we're just going to accommodate whatever you want.
Anything you want. What else can we do for you?
These are the same two conferences that they're a reason we didn't even have a true national championship until 1998, because they clung to the Rose Bowl like that lady from Titanic held on to the diamond or whatever that they went to find. That they clung to that like it was that. And then you have the fraud that was the 1997 Michigan Wolverines. You're telling me that Nebraska team wouldn't have just wiped the floor with those guys? Yes, they would have. But no, we got to vote the Rose Bowl. I mean, I wouldn't have even lended any kind of credit to that. It's the same. They are the two most arrogant leagues in the entire country.
It's also to that extent the two leagues that, if you read between the lines, very often they like to let you know that they take academics more seriously than the other conferences. They give you that persona, and even now it's like just because your president, your school president, is a doctor, that alone does not impress me. I know doctors; they're not all impressive people, and some of the smartest people on the planet have never gone to med school. So I don't. That doesn't like put you a step above everybody. And again, if you want to go back when history is written on how this whole thing was handled, Greg Sankey is going to be smelling like a rose. That is the guy that has done virtually everything right in a scenario where it's almost impossible to be right every time. He has done it. From the proper start date to the not hitting the panic button. He was the last one to cancel the SEC basketball tournament. All the things that have gone down when some others in their inexperience and lack of, again, campus experience have shown up rather loudly. Greg Sankey has been able to stand up above the rest. If there ever was a true czar or commissioner of college football, that'd be your number one candidate. I don't think it's happening, as I've said many times, for a lot of reasons, and I don't think there's any desire for Greg Sankey to leave the SEC. But he has come out smelling like a rose. I would say John Swofford has also come out pretty good on this end, not just from the standpoint of getting the ACC to get on board for football, but the Notre Dame thing. I think the Notre Dame thing was smart. Say what you want about that. It's a one and done deal. I get it. I know a lot of people have said, well, they should have just said, screw you, Notre Dame, take it or leave it. Well, Notre Dame would have left it, and then they never would have had that. If anything else, it does bring you one step closer to having Notre Dame as a full-time member. And for the time being in 2020, it makes it a much better league. So I think he's done well. I think Bob Bowlesby has done well. And then there's the other two. Some of the other things. How much of the action did you get a chance to see this weekend? We finally had a few FBS games. Did you check in on any of those?
Man, I watched a lot of UTEP.
Go Miners!
Go Miners! I thought they got Texas this week, so they might not be that good. But they came from behind to beat the Lumberjacks of Stephen F. Austin, and I thought that was kind of impressive. I got to watch a lot of Southern Miss, South Alabama. I watched the BYU demolition last night, and I felt sorry for Navy because I just think those guys didn't practice, and then they got hit in the like physically. Yeah. They've been doing 7-on-7 all preseason, and BYU's got a big old offensive line and just smacked them in the mouth. But Navy will come back. I mean, I think that's one of those that you just say, well, it is what it is.
They also lost one of the best players in college football, in Malcolm Perry. I don't think people realize Malcolm Perry, he actually gave you the threat of the forward pass. The young man last night is just not ready to do that.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing. But that BYU very impressive, and that people were pointing out. If we start talking about if they have bowl games, New Year's Six bowl games or whatever, BYU's schedule all of a sudden is, you're like, wow, if they can play like that the whole time, they don't, they kind of can coast. They could be undefeated and they could be in the playoff. We could have the Cougars, the 1984 national champions, could be back in the playoff. But, so I did watch some of that. I kind of, turned it on and off, watched a little baseball, to be honest, this weekend as well. But I don't think that the style of play was really any different than maybe some sloppy season openers have been in the past, Mike. And I think, when you talk about the SEC having 2 more weeks to get ready and the Big 12, playing some cupcakes off the top before they go into conference play, I think that you're gonna see some better football maybe than you think. But like Matt said earlier, it's not going to be the same as if it would have been a regular year. No,
the product is not going to be as crisp. I mean, tackling's been an issue at all levels of football anyway, even when they have full practices and there's not a pandemic. But that might be more glaring this season than others. And, offensively, in terms of being as crisp as you normally would be, it might not be the same. But I don't know if your average fan's going to be able to tell the difference, nor are they going to care. As long as you're winning games, that particular fan base is going to be happy. For the gamblers out there, you either cover the -5.5 or you don't. That's going to your happiness is going to depend almost entirely on that. And then for your average college football fan who just wants something to watch on a Saturday, it's there and you're thankful. I watched some of the game last night. It was clear early on BYU was just going to maul Navy. Again, Coach Ken to me is one of the top coaches in the country, doing more with less. The guy routinely wins 9-10 games a year, but as you mentioned, some of the liabilities they have had in preparation, and then you lose Malcolm Perry, who you could make the case was a legitimate Heisman Trophy candidate. Saw some of the Southern Miss game. I was surprised. South Alabama is not a good team. They hadn't won a road game in 3 years. But was even more surprising is that they fired Jay Hopson, their head coach, after the game. One and done. That I understand they didn't end the previous year well, but that's a little surprising. In the middle of a pandemic, after one game, you're going to ask your coach, look. Southern Miss is on the outside. I used to look at Southern Miss probably the way most people look at Southern Miss. What about Southern Miss? Brett Favre went there, beat Florida State when he was there. They used to win a lot of games. Coach Bauer was an upset machine. They would ruin somebody's season almost every year, it felt like. And you just felt like, and they're in fertile recruiting ground, the state of Mississippi. And so you just assume that Southern Miss should be one of those top Group 5 teams. Then you find out, having done a few games there and talked to some people, including Brett Favre, about it, they don't have money. They just don't have it. This goes beyond Conference USA's TV deal is not as good as the Power 5, obviously, and it would have been great if Southern Miss could have gotten in the American like everybody wanted to, but the American made a rather shrewd move. They wanted a lot of schools from major cities and major TV markets. In Hattiesburg, Mississippi, this just in, well, it's a charming town, and I've spent a few days there, is not that. And you, for whatever reason, the alumni base and the booster, they just are not getting what some of those other similar Group 5 schools are getting. And until that happens, Southern Miss, even though they've had good coaches roll through there, like Coach Munkin and others, it's a really tough job.
Yeah, I do think so. And I think that they have had good coaches. And Jeff Bauer, a lot of respect for that guy and what he did during his years at Southern Miss. And it's a lot like like East Carolina. East Carolina is a program that, they're stuck in Greenville, North Carolina, but they get 50,000 a game. They have a passionate fan base. So that's something. Southern Miss does too. I mean, that was a socially distant stadium last night. That's not their normal deal, but Bauer did such a great job there. And then it's like, after winning 119 games through the year 2007, things just haven't really been the same. Fedora had them going a little bit. They'd win 11 games or whatever. But when the conference broke, when the American, sort of broke off, and that is the sixth conference, no matter what anybody wants to say, that's tough. I mean, that's a tough deal. You're just kind of thrown in there with whoever. You've got peer schools that you've played for so long, like Tulane, that are in that league, and you've got Houston that's in that league, and Cincinnati, and those are schools that used to play Southern Miss every year. Memphis, but now they're kind of a step up, and that's tough. And I'd still think they can get somebody in there. And Bruce Feldman mentioned Rich Rodriguez's name the other day. I think a guy like Rich Rodriguez could go in there and make some noise in Conference USA for sure. But it's a much tougher job than what it used to be. And that's sad for those fans and the fans that do show up. And attendance hadn't been as great, But, I still think that when you think about, that program, it's not necessarily something that I would call on life support or a terrible job. I would say that it's something somebody can do something with. But, if you get an up-and-comer, he's going to be gone. If you get a Rich Rod or somebody like that, once they get their resume straight, you're not going to be able to hold on to him either. So we
right. And that's similar to most of those, Group 5, even the American coaches. Like if you do a really good job, whether it's, Herman at Houston and so on and so forth, you're going to get Power 5 offers and you're going to go. But a lot of those Group 5 schools, what they lack in TV revenue, maybe what they lack in overall gate. Like, for example, I've done games in Ruston, Louisiana Tech. Mm-hmm. And I'm here to tell you, they got some heavyweight donors. They got some guys with buku bucks that are not afraid to open up their checkbook. And if you need a new weight room or you need a new this, a new that, they are there, brother. And so what's the difference between Ruston, Louisiana and Hattiesburg, Mississippi? In some cases, it just comes down to one or two boosters. And that's the difference between your program having a fighting chance of really competing more versus maybe not. Because I think a lot of people thought when the smoke cleared and the American pilfered so many of the top Conference USA schools, and what was left was what was left on the in the CUSA, which had to basically pluck out schools like FIU and FAU with virtually no tradition. That Southern Miss would just dominate that league. That hasn't been the case at all because, again,
they started 7-3 last year and ended up in the Armed Forces Bowl and got waxed by Tulane. That's a peer school that they used to beat routinely. Tulane, and Tulane obviously with Willie Fritz had the leg up and they lost to Western Kentucky, FAU, and Tulane to end last season. And then open with a loss to South Alabama. I guess at Southern Miss, you lose to Lane Kiffin because their fans they don't like Ole Miss or Mississippi State. They don't take a back seat to those guys in that state. I know some of their fans. Mm-hmm. So you lose to Lane Kiffin, who's now the head coach at Ole Miss, and then you lose to Tulane, who you should never lose to, and used to never lose to, and then you open the season against South Alabama. It's right down the road in Mobile. Those are more hurtful losses than maybe we think when we're looking at it on the surface. So maybe that's why Jay Hobson's gone. It's going to be interesting to see who takes the job, though, because, like I said, I think that's an opportunity for somebody. Let's say like I don't know, name somebody from FCS that needs a deal. I don't know. I mean, that's an opportunity, I think, at Southern Miss to get there, win some games, and then use it as a bridge somewhere else.
You can get some talent. There have been there's a handful of guys from Southern Miss in the NFL right now.
Yeah.
So you can get some talent to Hattiesburg. That is for sure. Is it too soon to start looking at what we have on the slate for this coming Saturday?
No, we got that. I got the schedule up right here. Intrigued a little bit, and I'll just say a little bit. UAB at Miami. I'm curious to see what Miami's new look offense looks like Thursday night.
Yeah, you got Syracuse at North Carolina. You've got Louisiana at Iowa State. A lot of people think Iowa State could be a dark horse team to compete for a Big 12 championship team. I mean, Coach Campbell's done a great job. You look at their losses last year, they almost beat Oklahoma for the second straight year. I think they lost something like 3 games by a combined 5 or 6 points. I mean, they easily could have had a magical season in Ames last year. They just fell a little bit short in a couple of big games.
I think he's a great coach. And I think they could be a contender this year in the Big 12 for sure.
Are you not shocked like me that he's still there? I mean, I think he's waiting for an NFL job as well.
Maybe. Louisiana and Billy Napier, too. Billy Napier's a guy that last year probably could have had Mississippi State, but elected to stay at Louisiana. So that's a matchup of guys that we're kind of surprised that they're still there, huh?
Yeah. You've got Duke at Notre Dame. You could make a case that's as marquee as it gets this Saturday. Cutcliffe taking on the Golden Domers.
Chase Bryce, former Clemson backup, starting for the Blue Devils. Yep.
Completed that magical pass on 4th down, right?
Yeah.
Is that the same? They don't win a national championship if he doesn't do that.
I know. He was a really good backup. Honestly, I thought he may stick it out and take over for Trevor. They do have another quarterback there that's really good, but I've always liked him. I think he's going to be really good. And I don't know what Duke has coming back in terms of the rest of their skill talent, but I think they're going to be pretty good at quarterback. So that could always be interesting. I think Notre Dame's had a really good preseason. I've read a lot of really good things about them. They've avoided a lot of the COVID stuff for the most part. Brian Kelly seems confident. Notre Dame's a 20-point favorite, though, and Duke's going to go in there and play their heads off, so we'll see what happens there.
Missouri State at Oklahoma. You know what's significant about this game? It's the fact that in order to watch it, and you know how it is, if you're a fan of your particular team, you're going to do whatever you have to do to watch it. Well, there is no Big 12 network, right? This game has Big 12 network written all over it. Just like, if Alabama plays Western Carolina, that's going to be on the SEC network. And you get a chance to see it. If you're an Alabama fan, you don't have to watch it on your computer or anything else. You can watch it free. There's no Big 12 network. So if you're an Oklahoma fan and you want to see them battle the mighty Bears of Missouri State, you got to drop down $54.95 pay-per-view.
See. I mean, if I were a big-time Oklahoma fan, I'd pay it. But then there used to be pay-per-views. We remember that. But
I used to do them. I used to do SEC pay-per-view. I used to do conference games. I remember doing one of my last ones was South Carolina at Ole Miss pay-per-view. So for a league game in the most powerful, successful conference in college football, you had to spend $34.95 to watch it. Yet another advantage of your conference actually doing a deal with either ESPN or Fox to have a conference network. But when you don't have that and you still need to televise it, guess what? It's going to be a pay-per-view. Now, I've never heard of $54.95. That's a rather nice inflation rate, but they'll get people to pay it. They won't be happy about it, but they'll get people to pay it.
Oh, yeah. And look, schools are going to need money. I mean, tickets this year around the SEC, I'm hearing $150 a piece per game. So, and it's limited seating, of course. So it's kind of the demand is probably going to be higher. But, yeah, it's not going to be cheap to watch your favorite team this year. And that revenue will be important for Oklahoma to have because they're going to lose out so much in terms of not having a full house.
UTEP at Texas. That game will likely be over by midway through the second quarter. We were supposed to have FIU at UCF. That's been postponed. And then game day will be in Winston-Salem for the matchup of Clemson-Wake Forest. And obviously, again, in a normal year, I don't think game day is going to be in Winston-Salem. But this is a Clemson showcase. And, number one team in America, the face of college football, and Trevor Lawrence. You would expect that to get some pretty good coverage, and obviously that'll be the case.
Yeah, Wake. There was a time when Wake used to be kind of a bugaboo for Clemson back during the Tommy Bowden era, but Dabo's pretty much owned them. No fans at Truist Field in Winston-Salem. Truist is kind of a new company. You know, they I guess they merged with SunTrust and two banks merged. And so now the Braves play at Truist Field, which is blowing my mind. And
nobody likes saying it either.
I know. It's that
has not been a popular change.
SunTrust Park was awesome to say. Now Truist Park.
Yes.
But, you know, no fans in Winston-Salem at that game. And so, you know, I think it's going to kind of be a bizarre scrimmage-looking deal, but certainly good to see the Tigers get back out there and play. Dabo said today he didn't care if they piped in Marvin Gaye or whatever kind of music. They could just do that. And one interesting ACC game, though, Mike, Georgia Tech at Florida State, and I want to bridge to this because – some of our fans have been leaving questions about our podcast and rating us 5 stars.
Yeah, break them out.
I want to tell everybody we appreciate that. We promised we'd play it on it. Promised we'd talk Big 12, and we have. Promised we'd answer these questions. And please go to the Apple iTunes or Apple Podcast. It used to be iTunes. Right there on you. Rate us 5 stars and write a little review if you can. And just to go through one of them before I get to this one, RMG Jr. says this is the best sports podcast there is.
Like it.
A. Doug says amazing for college football fans. This is required listening. If you want to know what coaches, athletic directors, and players are saying about the games and headlines, Mike and JC are seasoned and tenured. It's no nonsense and informative. It'll help you talk to your friends about the college football details they don't know about.
Sweet. RMG and A. Doug, I just want to say right off the bat, you rule. Please.
It's like, you know, in a world full of hot takes and politics, invading college football, Mike and JC shoot it straight. Best CFB podcast on 24/7 because we are on 24/7 Sports, and one of the best in the country. All right, so Dave says, love the podcast. Keep up the good work, Mike and JC. What's your take on how long it will take Coach Collins, Jeff Collins, to get Georgia Tech to the point of challenging in the ACC? Georgia Tech is at Florida State, 3:30 p.m. Eastern time kickoff. Doak Campbell and Tallahassee. I think they're letting about 18,000 in. Very interesting football game, in my opinion, Michael. Very interesting, just because some of the turmoil Florida State's had. And, you know, Georgia Tech showed they weren't completely lifeless last year. They beat Miami and I think NC State. So your thoughts on this game and then your thoughts on Jeff Collins at Tech.
Well, I like the hire of Jeff Collins. I thought it was a solid hire. Look, the Georgia Tech job maybe lost a little luster over the years. And I can tell you, and I back when I was hosting a show here in Atlanta, you know, I would open it up to Georgia Tech fans. This is a market that's dominated by Georgia. It's dominated by the SEC fan bases. But every now and then I wanted to sneak in a little G Tech. And they would constantly bring up the point that the math requirement, like it's no joke. Like there's no getting past it. It is what they have to do to get certain kids in and keep them eligible is unique. Now, I don't know that firsthand, but I've talked to enough people who have said that. And you know, I even knew an analyst on his staff. Remember, now you get 9 full-time coaches, but you also get to hire analysts. To give you an idea, the difference in the budget of a Georgia Tech, say, versus even a Florida State right in your own league, that analyst that I knew got fired because of the pandemic, because they couldn't afford to keep paying him. Not because he did a bad job. He was all set to go. That's Georgia Tech is run. They have some obstacles that a Clemson, a Florida State, a North Carolina maybe simply don't have. Georgia Tech, the last time I checked, is picked near the bottom or at the bottom of most of the ACC polls. Look, when he took over, it was a low point. Paul Johnson, who had some fine moments there, but Paul Johnson, it got to the point where Georgia Tech was just irrelevant. They were hard to watch.
Yeah.
Right? They weren't winning. They were hard to watch. There was no buzz, no pun intended. And once that job came open, it's like whoever takes it over, in my estimation, that was a 3 or 4 year rebuild. So I would tell any Georgia Tech fan, be patient, because this was not a job that was going to be a turnkey, you know, get back to you winning ways in 2 years. Like I think it's going to take 3 or 4 years to re-recruit to obviously they've changed that offense, thank goodness. And the ACC, you could make the argument, has gotten a little bit better. You've got some programs now, like in North Carolina, that are starting to be more relevant. So I would say give it 3-4 years. This year could be another one that's going to be tough.
Yeah, I think, I was surprised actually last year that they won a game, to be honest. They lost to Citadel, but somehow Miami lost to them, and that makes that Miami UAB game pretty important in my opinion. But I don't know. They got some guys. I like Malachi Carter at receiver. I like Jameis Griffin at running back. Jordan Mason's a solid running back. James Graham was a freshman quarterback last year. Dual threat guy. Jordan Yates is good. Jeff Sims is good as a freshman. So I think maybe they'll show some steps. But honestly, if Florida State loses that one, then the fellowship of the miserable in Tallahassee is going to continue, because that means FSU is a lot worse than what we think. But I'm with you. It's going to take Jeff Collins a couple of years. He is recruiting well. They're recruiting Georgia talent. The recruiting didn't make – I mean, basically Paul Johnson used recruiting as some sort of like, oh, I'm just going to go recruit whoever I want, and then I'm going to show you because I'm going to run the option and beat you. And then when I leave, we're going to have Southern Conference talent on offense, and nobody's going to be able to do anything. So I think that was it right there.
And I'll just say this real quick. If you've ever been to Grant Field or a game at Georgia Tech, I mean, there's so much going for that program that they should be better. Like, if you can't sell kids on playing in downtown, midtown Atlanta, the mecca of college football, there is, of course, tradition going back 100 years at Georgia Tech. I know it's an engineering school. It's different. It's just, you have to get over that. It's different. But it's a cool place to play college football, and I think you can win there. And it wasn't that long ago they were doing it. Again, Paul Johnson, for as much as I just could not stand that offense, had some blips on the radar of success. You go back to O'Leary and Gailey. You can win at Georgia Tech.
Oh, yeah. It should be one of the best programs in the ACC. I mean, just to be honest. I mean, it's in the state of Georgia, for goodness sake. And I know they have challenges there, but their fan base, as small as it is very passionate. And that they used to be they left the SEC, Mike, in the 60s, not for any other reason, but like they thought they could go independent. Like they were like Texas was going to do. We'll just leave the Big 12 and go independent. That's how good Georgia Tech was once upon a time.
They were a power. There's no doubt about it. And I don't know if they're going to get back to top 20 type power, but I certainly think they could be much better than what they've been.
Absolutely. All right, I'll read one more of these things, and then we're going. All right, best college football pod by far. These two are fair and know their stuff. There isn't a lot of fat to be trimmed. Well, you haven't seen my waistline lately. Mike had Ohio State not bailed on the season, and he said OSU. I'm assuming it's not Oregon State. Would they have beaten Clemson in a national championship game?
Again, I'm going to assume all these questions are no COVID casualties at the time of the game.
As is.
As is. God, I thought that I think that would have been an outstanding game, the kind that college football deserves and could have used, even if it was in a semifinal, whatever. But I mean, to me, I would give Clemson a slight edge, but I mean, it's almost a pick'em game on a neutral field. I think Justin Fields was destined to have a magical year in Columbus. I realize they lost a lot on the line, but they lose a lot on the line every year. They become Alabama in that respect. They had weapons around Fields, ETN and Lawrence. I just think it would have been an outstanding game, but I would have made Clemson a slight favorite.
I would have made Clemson a slight favorite. I don't know. I'm going to go with Ohio State, and Clemson people are about, well, that's no surprise. I'll pick Clemson when they need. Clemson lost some guys now. T. Higgins, Justin Ross is not with that team now. They have some bigger young receivers that played a lot last year, Nagata and Latson. Will Sweeney, Dabo's son, is second-team receiver. They've got some guys that are kind of unproven. They lost some offensive linemen. I think that you got ETN, you got Lawrence, you're probably better than most of the teams you play. But then, you look at the defense, and there's a lot of talent. Miles Murphy is going to be an excellent freshman defensive end, and Brian Breesy may be the best freshman defensive lineman in the entire country. In fact, I would pick him as that. But that Ohio State team they had coming back, Mike, was loaded. And I think because Fields is at least close to Lawrence, I would have probably given them the edge. And I know that makes every Buckeye fan that happens to be listening to our podcast sick to the stomach. Because looking at Clemson, are they going to have the ability to throw it up? T. Higgins makes a magical catch. Are they going to have that kind of guy? Because, I like these guys. I like Nagata. I like Latson. They're both bigger guys that are capable, but they're not proven. And so that's my only question there because, the few times Clemson did get in trouble last year, maybe Lawrence throws an errant pass or something like that. They had a lot of guys that could just go up and jump and get it and run. And, I'm not saying they don't have it right now, but if I were just projecting, I would go probably with Ohio State. Okay.
Yeah, of course, they lose Chase Young, but obviously still have a lot of talent on defense. Again, it would have been an outstanding game. There's nobody we're going to miss in the big picture from the Pac-12. I don't think anybody from the Pac-12 was – I know Oregon had some buzz, but I just don't think they were getting in the playoff this year.
They would have lost. They would have knocked each other. USC, Oregon, Arizona State, Utah. Right. They'd have probably – Washington, they'd have probably all canceled each other out.
Yeah. So, I didn't see the Pac-12 factoring in, per usual, in the playoff. But Ohio State, yeah. Oh, yeah.
I think Ohio State would have been excellent. I think now we're going to have a big chaotic year, right, where you're going to see, everybody except Alabama and Clemson, you're going to go, what the heck, every weekend. But my prediction is we're going to be sitting there, Mike, me and you, recording a pre-national championship game podcast, and it's going to be Alabama and Clemson yet again in the championship game. I just feel like after all this 2020, we're going to go right back to Bama versus Clemson for all the marbles, because I think very quietly Alabama has a very, very good team coming back.
No question. They're the Vegas favorite to win the SEC. It's almost like we took our year off from that with LSU, and now let's get back to normal and have Nick Saban and the Crimson Tide winning the Southeastern Conference. And then, Clemson they're not going to be put. Notre Dame, no, they're not going to be pushed in the ACC. I don't believe. And the thing is, I know this is supposed to be the most unpredictable, crazy, wacky, zany year, but everybody's playing with the same disadvantages. And when you're playing with those disadvantages, the deepest teams have the biggest advantage. The deepest teams are the ones we keep talking about every year in the playoff. And so they're going to have an even bigger advantage, in my estimation.
You're going to say, and I will say this, though. I don't think there's a lot of those teams. I think Alabama and Clemson are in that category. I think Ohio State, had they been playing, was in that category. I think everybody else, player here, player there, they may be in some trouble at certain positions, like your Floridas of the world. Georgia's probably up there right behind those two or three I mentioned, because I actually think regardless of their quarterback situation, they're going to be good. But, your Floridas of the world, your Texas A&Ms, your Oklahomas, even they're LSU. Matt said something interesting earlier. Everybody's still talking about LSU, as Nick Saban said, they're just going to poop another player because they've recruited well. Dude, 35 guys are gone. They have 5 returning starters off that team. They lost both coordinators. You have guys opting out. It's an all SEC schedule.
Yeah.
I love Ed Orgeron, man, but
I don't see it. Not this year.
Don't be surprised if they're eking out a bowl trip,
And you don't quote unquote poop Jamar Chases out, even for a school that gets a ton of good wide receivers. That dude was different. When he opted out, that's a major development there. And I'll just say to our Big 12 fan who had a question last week that we weren't able to get to, because the clock ran out on us. Look, it's got to start being Texas to help build up the brand of that league. Mm-hmm. It can't be Oklahoma and the other 9. You've got Ellinger back. You've got a lot of veterans back. Tom Herman has had enough time now to actually win the Big 12. So that's what you need. There's certain conferences that just simply have to have a certain program be good for the overall league to be really good or great. The SEC doesn't, believe it or not, the SEC doesn't have to have Alabama to have that. It helps, but as you saw last year, you still got LSU, you got A&M on the come, you got Georgia consistently a power, you got Florida on the come, you've got programs people don't even talk about that are good, like Kentucky. That's the difference. The Big 12 can't rely on TCU, Oklahoma State, Iowa State, as good a story as they are. And we talked about Matt Campbell earlier and threw him a few bouquets, but it's got to be Texas. And this is a grand opportunity for Texas, because I know everybody is in love with the Oklahoma quarterback, but he is still a redshirt freshman. Am I right?
Oh, yeah.
He's not a transfer. So he's not going to have the advantage of Baker and Kyler. And it's going to be a little bit different look in Norman.
Yeah, I agree. And, you got to see kind of what happens there. And obviously the game with Texas is going to be huge. I mean, but that league, and had TCU not lost their quarterback, I think they would have snuck up on some people. I have no idea what to think about Baylor. Dave Aranda takes over there. Oklahoma State, though, is supposed to be good. And we mentioned Iowa State earlier. Watch out for those two teams as flies in the ointment for Texas and OU, because I think those teams are capable, very capable, and they're both very well coached.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to down the league. I like the Big 12. Again, I had 4 fun years calling games in that league. I think top to bottom, it's a good, solid league.
It's a fun league, yeah.
So there's a lot of fun league, but you can't get past the impression is that they play no defense in that league. That's not going to change until things start changing, literally on the field with scores and yards and everything else. And you've got to have more than Oklahoma. There's got to be a number 2 there, and I just don't see anybody fulfilling that role in the immediate future other than Texas.
I'm with you there. I think Oklahoma State roster-wise, because of the guys they have back, Chuba Hubbard, is a really good player. But are they good on defense? That defense suspect. It's probably still suspect. Iowa State. You can't really see them breaking through and beating everybody. Although they were very close last year to just about everybody they played. I think the Notre Dame game. In the bowl, they lost 33-9, pretty bad. I think that's kind of motivated Notre Dame a little bit, and given them momentum. But we'll see. We'll see kind of what happens with that. The Big 12 should be fascinating to see if anybody else does rise up this year. And that's certainly, with only 3 Power 5 leagues to talk about, Mike, that's going to be a talking point for us is the Big 12 this year, and kind of, Texas OU or whoever else.
With those other 2 leagues dropping out, it's just a huge opportunity for leagues like the Big 12, the American, the ACC. I mean, the SEC quite honestly didn't need any help, but I think there's other leagues, some of those programs, those midline programs, could have used a boost. They get it this year. You can't say you're not going to get exposure. You are going to be plastered all over the TV windows throughout the day, when ordinarily you might just be buried on the depth chart. That's not going to be the case this year. A lot of inventory has been lost, and you're going to be the benefactors of that for sure. I like the questions. Tell folks before we sign off how they can give us some more of those, and we'll read some more and answer some more next week. Absolutely. Go to the Apple Podcast Store, and it used to be iTunes. It's right there. If you're an iPhone user like I am, not Mike, but like I am, you have a podcast app right on your phone. Go look for JC and Morgan. Scroll down. There's a rating. You rate us 5 stars, and then leave us a review and leave us a question, and we'd love to hear from you. I always like to be interactive. Another thing you can do is
we have a Twitter account for the podcast. It's at JC and Morgan, at JC and Morgan on Twitter. Just tweet at us. You can tweet at that. You can tweet at Mike at Morgan on Air, or at me at JC Sherbert. That's SHURBURTT. So get us on Twitter. Preferably, I'll say the priorities are going to be the one on the Apple Pod Store, just because that's kind of how we get ranked on lists and stuff like that. More people can enjoy a good cold JC and Morgan by listening to our podcast.
Yeah, and for cavemen like me that are still Android users, you'll still find a way to reach us. By the way, speaking of cavemen, remind me to tell you my Postal Service story next week. We don't have enough time this week, but
I can imagine.
I said this once years ago. Wes Durham and I were doing a show here in Atlanta like 7 years ago, and I started off there. He could tell I was visibly upset. And I just shook my head, and he said, "What?" I said, "I won't get into the story, but let's just say, the Postal Service, you guys had a good run. You really did. You had a good run, but it's time." 7 years later, I was forced to mail a valuable package because it was a return, and so there was no FedEx or UPS option. And sure enough, it was an unmitigated disaster. So maybe some of you can commiserate with me next week on that story.
Yeah, definitely. I'm sure people can. So,
all right. Again, thanks to Matt Stinchcomb. Thanks to everybody tuning in. We'll see you next week. For JC, Mike saying so long.